So this is where I left it last time, right? Where I was talking about this paper where they showed the neural correlates of experience in meditation. So people had these subjective experiences during a meditative process. So there was attention, and then a loss of focus and awareness, a transition back to attention or focus, right? So there were these like 4 stages. And we saw that in experienced or high practice meditators, this shift period where they are struggling to get their attention back on track, it's much easier for people who have higher experience. And they were able to localize these to some of the usual suspects in the prefrontal cortex that are associated with this executive function or these attention networks. So that was where we were. And here's just another paper. There's a number of these that I could have pulled out, but this one's kind of cool. It was looking at the effect of different types of meditation. And so this is going to be one of the themes I want to bring out, is that there are different types of meditations that do different things to your brain, like actually different things to your brain. And this is going to be one of the papers that hits this theme. We'll see a couple others later on. So it's looking at these different types of meditation: concentration versus loving kindness versus choiceless awareness, and the impact that they have on this default mode network, the mind-wandering part of our brain. All right, and the connectivity associated with the default mode network. So what was I going to say? Oh, I didn't put a picture. I should have. Judson Brewer, out of, where is it? University of Washington, published this paper. It's about 7 years old. I don't know who Judson Brewer is. I should have got a picture of him. All right. So here it is. And so the idea is that there are these shifts from default mode network to the attention network. And we strengthen the connections in this, and the default mode network connection or activation decreases during meditation. This shouldn't be surprising given what we've already said. So on the left in panel C, you see signal intensity of meditators versus control in this medial prefrontal cortex, part of the default mode network. And in meditators, the activation, so they were looking at functional MRI. They were looking at how much this part of the brain actually got activated, all right? So in meditators, this part of the brain, which was part of the default mode network, we see it right here, lit up in the same diagram we did. This is significantly reduced compared to controls. All right, and it's not the same for each type of meditation. Choiceless awareness has a little bit more activity. So having this higher up here means there's more activity in the default mode network. Whereas the other two, the loving kindness and the concentration, involves greater deactivation of the default mode. So you can think about that. This makes sense, right? So these two types of meditation, the loving kindness and the concentration based, like, for example, we did some of that today, focusing on the breath, the word Om or whatever you were thinking of. Those involve the attention network, the focus network, the executive function network. And you have an object that you can train your mind on. And so you're going to have a significant, that's going to help you decrease action in the default mode network. Whereas choiceless awareness, you're not making any choice to say the word Om or focus on your breath or say, I love you, Donald Trump, or something like that. And so your mind has greater activation of the default mode network in that type of meditation. All right. And similarly, they see in another region of the default mode network, which is the posterior cingulate cortex. We've talked about that region before. Likewise, you have a similar pattern. Right. So let's summarize all this. This is where I meant to get last time. So meditation is often popularly described as this like single state of being. Like I'm meditating, they're meditating, right? That's not correct. That there are numerous brain states that occur during meditation. These can be objectively quantified by looking at experimental data, and then can be correlated with subjective experiential reports from the practitioners. So specifically, that when there are reports of people having focused attention, they report focused attention, that there are spikes in activity in the attention networks of the brain. Conversely, when people report having wandering minds, there are spikes within the default mode network, which has been called the mind wandering thing. Yeah.
So meditation, like if they're being diagnosed with ADD, they are not cured, but like develop their brain meditation.
You just hold on to that curiosity because I have some slides for you.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So there's evidence to suggest that these meditative practices become easier with time, with practice, and are associated with specific neuroanatomical and neurofunctional changes to the brain, which are a consequence of this repeated practice. All right, so that's that. Let's look at the model for meditation that we've built up over the last several slides. So there's enhanced attentional control, right? We showed that these meditators were able to control reestablish their attention, their focus more readily than inexperienced meditators, and this has anatomical correlates in the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the insula, these regions in blue in that brain there that are part of the attention network. There's also enhanced emotional regulation that's been demonstrated with its neural correlates as well. We have not gone through the anatomy as deeply as we could, certainly, and that's beyond what I'm interested in. But we've talked about a number of these areas. The insula we talked about quite a bit. The prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate. Diminished self-referential processing. So when I say self-referential processing, what do I mean? What is that? What's the other word or a series of words that I've used what controls self-referential processing? See, that would be a good question on a test. So I said the first two, right? It's all about the shift between these two brain states, right? These two brain states. And this brain state I've been calling the attention network. And the orange has been the default mode network. These first two on this bullet point list refer to enhancements in the attention network, functional enhancements here. Diminished self-referential processing, that refers to the default mode network. So if you go back to when I was first talking about default mode network, I called it the me center in the brain. And I talked about the different aspects that default mode network had. Those were the parts of the brain that reflect back on the self. There's a number of functions that the default mode network have. But meditation leads to diminished self-referential processing. This is kind of interesting to me because you didn't get to, you didn't have the privilege of all of the access to Sarah that I did, but the week that she was here, we had lots of interesting conversations while we weren't in class. And one of them, she talked about actually some of the dangers of meditation. She has been on some retreats before with some people who do this like super intense, they'll like meditate for a week of silence or whatever, or longer periods of time. And there have been times when people not within the context of a supported guide have so changed the functioning of their default mode network that they have this sense of complete disconnect with themselves and with others. This is part of the impact on the default mode network and self-referential processing. Yeah, that's right. And then we have enhanced body awareness. All right, so being these people who are meditators have a very good sense of their somatosensory, somatotopic mapping in the body. All right. So all of this leads, as I was suggesting there, to a reduction in the default mode network, an increase in activity in the attention or executive network, and not just in terms of volume or functional activity, but in terms of actual network connectivity in these different distributed brain networks. And all of this gives the meditator a sort of increased access to information processing in their brain with this increase in network connectivity. Again, all leading to improved self-regulation. All right, so still grinding away through this list that I established so long ago in your outline notebooks. You guys have been wanting to get back to the margin. Well, here it is. Before we've talked about all of these structural changes to the brain, neuromorphologic, neuroanatomical. There are functional changes, psychological changes. Well, meditation certainly helps relieve levels of anxiety and depression. We have evidence for this. So I'm going to show you a paper that was looking at the relationship between mindful practice or meditation and levels of anxiety or stress. This was a meta-analysis. So what is a meta-analysis? Yeah. They're looking in a methodical way. They're analyzing the data from many papers and looking at trends across several studies, all right, to try to draw a larger conclusion based upon many, many studies. So they found 47 studies. There's been several meta-analyses, and I'm just listing 3 of them here. This guy, Goyal, in 2014, in his meta-analysis, looking across clinically depressed, anxious, or stressed out individuals in the adult population, found across the 47 studies that there were small reductions in stress due to mindful practice, but very highly varied, dependent upon a number of factors. We're going to actually look at that paper in detail in a moment. And then here's another meta-analysis that came out more recently that included 29 studies of healthy adult populations. So these are not people that are reporting clinical anxiety or, like pathologic levels of stress, just sort of the normal baseline of anxiety that we all have in And in this population, across these 29 studies, they found that there were actually significant levels of reduction in stress and anxiety that we all feel, right? Because stress is part of our lives. Stress is part of, anxiety is part of the society we live in. And so this would suggest that these people with clinical anxiety, there may be a deeper biochemical origin to that is a little bit more resistant to mindful practice, but still amenable to this method. And then in healthy adult populations, there's a huge reduction in stress that can be found in many studies. 29 different studies have, and these are rigorously vetted, you know, well-controlled studies. So, and then it's not just in the adult population. Here is a study that was published just in the last year and a half, looking at young people from your age and below. And so finding that there were small reductions in distress and negative emotion, even while the brain is developing. Even during that part, so I talked a little bit. Did I talk about the teenage brain much? I probably didn't. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe next year. During adolescence, that prefrontal cortex, which is so important as both part of the default mode network and the attention network, is still developing. It's the last part of the brain to develop. And even in these individuals whose prefrontal cortex hasn't quite gotten to full maturity yet, there is still a measurable improvement in their anxiety. So let's look at one of these. Let's look at this Goyal one in 2014. Small reductions in stress, but let's unpack what that actually means. Here he is, Madhav Goyal. He is at Johns Hopkins University, just got that amazing grant from Michael Bloomberg. What was it, like $1.3 billion? Yeah, this is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So this is like gold standard here, right? This is not some paper that came out of the British Journal of Nursing in India or something like that. And not that there's anything wrong with papers necessarily there, but these are, this journal, for example, is going to have a very wide audience, and probably a very high impact and also very high review standards for getting into the literature. So what did he find? He found that the effect of meditation is on anxiety and depression equal to that of medication. He found that the people who were clinically depressed, the effect on their depression and anxiety that would come from one group that was taking medication, that impact from medication over control, is equal to the impact of meditation on the similarly clinically depressed group. So it's modest, right? You have clinical depression and anxiety, you go to see a doc, they throw a pill at you and they say, it works sometimes. You take it and maybe it works or maybe it doesn't, or maybe it makes a little better, but not a whole lot. The effect of meditation is similar in magnitude. So as much success or failure as the pharmaceutical industries had for treating anxiety and depression, it is like a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? The effect of learning how to use your mind meditatively can have an equal effect. And I haven't dug through the paper enough to see whether there was a synergistic effect or not. What was your question?
I was just going to ask. Obviously, like the antidepressants cause addiction on them. Has there been shown? I guess people. It wouldn't be like the same effect with medication and like can't function with things.
Well, can't think if they don't do it. I don't know. I don't know if people are thinking about it quite in that way. I've just spent a lot of time showing you several slides that suggest that meditation does change your brain, both functionally and physically. So medicine also, pharmaceuticals change your brain. They change the expression patterns of different receptors on the surface of those neurons. So in terms of habituation, the effects of habituation, I think the language and also I would say the like biochemical characterization or biomolecular characterization of habituation is probably not quite the right paradigm to understand the effect of meditation on the brain. So does that answer the question? Yeah. Here's a quote. I'll read it because it's a quote. A lot of people have this idea that meditation means sitting down and doing nothing. I think a lot of people do, right? You ask your grandma what, not to slam grandma, but you ask her what she thinks meditation means. Maybe you've got a totally woke grandma and she meditates all the time, but my grandma would not think that that's what that means. Maybe, I don't know. She prayed a lot, so maybe she had a different idea about meditation. He says, that's not true. That was all in parentheses there. Meditation is an active training of the mind to increase awareness, and different meditation programs approach this in different ways. Okay, sort of a little bit vague statement there, but meditation is an active training of the mind. I think that is a key point there. Yes?
What is the
Sure.
Would that be the?
Yeah, so I had said that I didn't dig into this to see this paper to see what the synergistic effects might be in terms of some of these studies. This is a meta-analysis in and of itself. But that you now have all the tools to answer that question. And you also have an assignment in front of you, which is pick out a paper. So I don't know. Looks like there's a path opening up for you. I would be surprised if there weren't some synergistic effects, obviously. Anyone else? Okay. So again, finally, on the last bullet point on this slide, holy cow. Improved attention, concentration, and overall psychological well-being. I'm coming for you, Stuart. This was your question that you had earlier. Yeah, here we go. All right. This guy, look at him, Michael Mrazek. I don't know how to say that, but this was published in 2013 in Psychological Science, the journal Psychological Science. He's at UC Santa Barbara. I'm sure nice place to live. He looks like he's happy about it. Oh yeah, cool, nice place. Mindfulness training improves working memory capacity and GRE performance while reducing mind wandering. I picked this one. I could have picked a number of them, but I picked this one because perhaps many of you will be taking the GRE someday. And graduate record exam. It's like the SAT for your next step, right? If you take another step, yeah. So graduate record exam. It's everybody has to take the GRE to get into graduate school of any sort. Law school is LSAT and medical school is the MCAT. Yeah. But GRE is like if you want to be me, you got to take the GRE. Yeah, like a PhD. If you want to get a PhD, you got to. Anyways, whatever. So what was this guy's hypothesis? A 2-week mindfulness training course will decrease mind wandering and improve cognitive performance in undergraduates taking the GRE. Just 2-week course in how to meditate or be mindful, use your mind, focus and attention skills. That's going to improve the ability to perform on the GRE. So, not surprisingly, it worked. And he found that the effect was most pronounced in people who reported problems with mind wandering. So if I were to like poll the class, let's just try it now. Who in the class would characterize themselves as being a person who really has a mind wandering a tendency? Their mind wanders a lot. So yeah, I mean it was like pretty much almost everyone except Misa. So it's okay. Not everybody's mind wanders that much. Some people have a very focused mind. That's great. So anyways, the improvement was most pronounced in participants who were prone to distraction at a pretest. So let's look at some of these results. So on the left is the GRE, and we see that, so as a control, he had a group of students, instead of doing like mindfulness training, they just sat around and talked about nutrition, like diet and like eating well, and like talked about how to like focus on making sure that you eat well. That seems like a pretty good control. You got to do something. And so this is, talking about food. And when you look at pre-test in the light bar versus post-test, these two are with the error bars. They're not statistically significantly different from one another. You see the difference, but the mean is within each other's error bars, so they're not statistically significant in terms of the difference between. There's really no change. Whereas there was a statistically significant. That's what this asterisk is showing. The means are outside of each other's error bars. There was a statistically significant change in from the pre-test to post-test in the people that took the mindfulness training on their GRE scores. There was also this working memory capacity activity that they had the students do, the exact details of which escape me now, but they're in the paper. And again, there was no significant change in the group that had the nutrition training, whereas people who did the mindfulness had an increased working memory capacity. So that's, for example, if I were to ask you to multiply 7 and 12 and then divide the result by 6 and add 14 to it before dividing by 3. If you were to do that and like do it in your head, not on a piece of paper, that's working memory, where you have to like carry numbers in your head and like hold this number over here while I do this thing. Can be a complicated cognitive task. So it improved their ability to do those sorts of things as well. And then this slide of data is looking at what are called task unrelated thoughts, essentially default mode network, essentially mind wandering. So you're supposedly doing a task, but you are thinking about something else while you're doing that. Like I'm thinking about my child who's down in the lobby here playing with her friend. Hopefully she's not running around. But that's not the task that I have in front of me. I'm here to tell you about this slide, about task unrelated thoughts. And in all instances, there were significant improvements or by improvement I mean reduction in task unrelated thought, or reduction in mind wandering, aka reduction in default mode network. That is found they had this like probe, this experimental probe that they were using in one of the activities, or self-reported on the working memory test, or self-caught on the GRE. So, yeah, that makes sense. Yep. You're gonna have to read the paper for those details. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how what the actual probe. It describes it in the paper, but it was somehow embedded in the working memory test that they were giving them. There was some sort of thing that was probing for it. I don't know. You can read it. Probably should have not put that slide on if I couldn't answer that question, that picture. But yeah, man. Like what kind of information are people gleaning about your brain by your social media activities? It's essentially the same thing, right? All right, so there we go. Done with that. Up to this point, I have been talking about the effect of stress on the nervous system and how yoga and meditation can mitigate that, right? I'm going to continue to talk about that. But up to this point, it's been focused on the central nervous system, particularly the brain, right? And what were the consequences? Well, we learned that the central nervous system has both structural, meaning neuroanatomical, and functional, meaning psychological responses to mindful activity. We're going to shift briefly to talking about the autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to talk for the last 15 minutes today about this, and then a little bit more next time for half the class, and then the last half of the class I'm going to talk about the immune system because you had asked for that, and that fits into this. So, all right. The autonomic nervous system is part of our peripheral nervous system. It's not in the spine. It's not in the spinal cord. It's not in the brain. It's a peripheral system, and it is central. It is central to the stress response. All right, the ANS is the neural mediator of the stress response. We've talked about it a little bit already, the fight or flight versus rest and digest. Okay, we're going to unpack it quite a bit more here. The ANS is strongly responsive to different types of mindful practice, be they yoga or meditation. All right, the autonomic nervous system is strongly responsive to this. We're going to begin to see why. The bottom line is that it's going to downregulate pro-inflammatory, what are called cytokines. I'm going to talk about those a little bit in the immune system unit that we talk our way through. But a lot of cytokines that have effects on the autonomics. All right. First, though, let's look at the autonomic nervous systems. You will need to memorize everything on this slide. Have I engaged your sympathetic nervous system yet? No, isn't that a nice picture, though? It took me a long time to make it. Yeah, there it is. So let's see what we have. There are two branches. I've already established this. There's the parasympathetic nervous system, also called the craniosacral. It's called the craniosacral, and then sympathetic called the thoracolumbar. And I'm going to go through that in a moment. The craniosacral nervous system, or the parasympathetic nervous system, is so called because it emerges from the central nervous system in either along what are called cranial nerves, and these are nerves that you'll remember, cast your mind back to the first day when Sarah was here and I talked about the nervous system. I said you can either leave the central nervous system via cranial nerves that come through holes in your head, right, or via spinal nerves that come right off your spine. All right, cranial nerves come right off the brain through the cranium, the little holes in the cranium. And then they also can emerge off the sacrum. So when you talk about, maybe some of you have heard craniosacral massage before. Has anyone heard craniosacral therapy? No, sort of, whatever. It's a type of physical therapy that is meant to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. Anyways, And then the sympathetic is called thoracolumbar because it emerges from the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spine, all right? And has these what are called synapses, these relay centers along something called the sympathetic chain ganglia. Ganglia are just clusters of cell bodies that are found in the periphery. And there's a chain of them. There's a chain of these sympathetic ganglia that run along the posterior margin of the body wall, along right next to your spine, but not in the spine. They are outside of the vertebra that run along the back of the thoraco-abdominal cavity, the ventral body. All right, so let's look at a little bit of this. I'm not going to ask you to memorize quite all of this. I'm going to highlight the parts of it that are important, but I put it all up here so that you can begin to appreciate if yoga and meditation, if the autonomic nervous system, either branch, is extremely responsive to yoga and meditation, then, and these are all functions of the autonomic nervous system, then you can imagine that yoga and meditation can have an impact on all of these different physiological phenomena that you see in front of you here. Okay? Does that register, and you're beginning to see the broader landscape? Like, wow, we really could talk about this stuff for like probably years. I could probably stretch this class out into like 4 semesters if I wanted to. Yeah, she's ready. But we're not going to do that. I'm just trying to point out that it touches on a lot of things, just this aspect of yoga and meditation here. What I'm going to focus on is the vagus nerve. You've talked about it in your other class with that, forget that name, but it's a cranial nerve number 10. CNX is what that means, cranial nerve 10. The vagus nerve, vagus. Jensen, it's a gentleman, right? What did he tell you the vagus nerve means? What's the etymology of vagus? Oh, okay. Well, this is not like Las Vegas. It is like Vegas as in vagrant. Vagrant. What is a vagrant? A vagrant is a person who wanders. It means the wandering nerve. The vagus nerve is called the vagus nerve because it's the wandering nerve. And if you look at it, like, what is that vagus nerve hitting? Holy smokes. It's going to the heart. It's going to the lungs. It's going to the liver. It's going to the stomach. It's going to the pancreas. It's going to the, I don't even know what that is. It's the spleen, I guess. It's going to the intestines of various sorts. And then, and the rectum, it's tying into the other pelvic splanchnic ganglions that hit the kidneys and bladder and scrotum and vagina, uterus, all that stuff. So, whoa, really is kind of wandering about the world, the inner world at least. So that is what we're going to focus on, the vagus nerve. And in fact, I'm going to focus on just the tiniest part of it, the effect on the heart and lungs, how it deals with those two parts. That's where I'm going to focus my attention. Likewise, on the thoracolumbar autonomics, we have all this stuff, like it dilates the pupil, salivary glands, et cetera, et cetera. Just the heart and lungs is all that I'm really going to focus on. Okay, and I'm not even going to get deep into it. But parasympathetic nervous system is going to slow the heart rate. It's called bradycardia. You'll see that in the next slide. Or speed the heart rate from the sympathetic nervous system. That's called tachycardia. And in the lungs, it's going to dilate the bronchi, make it easier to breathe, like bring more oxygen in, and constrict the bronchi here during parasympathetic efflux. So this is the autonomics. All right, everybody happy with that one? Cool. So Yeah, this is just sort of a functional list of things that happen in the sympathetic nervous system. I questioned whether I wanted to put this in, but the one I'm going to focus on is just this. Its ability to increase heart rate. And likewise, in the parasympathetic, decrease the heart rate. So I could probably delete those slides. I already made that point on the previous picture. Okay, so to move forward, I got to tell you a little bit about the heart. A little bit about the heart and how the heart works. I'm not going to talk about the plumbing in the heart and like a lot of this other stuff. I just need to talk to you about the wiring, the electrical wiring, because we're going to talk. That's how the autonomic nervous system, the electrical communication system in the body, how it's going to affect the heart. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the wiring of the heart and how that actually works. So the heart is made of cardiac muscles, right? Cardiomyocytes, which are kind of similar to skeletal muscles, but they're different in a couple important ways. First of all, they don't need a nerve from the brain coming down and telling it it's time to contract. It does not happen like that. The heart can function relatively independently from the brain, actually. There are these specialized muscle fiber cells, cardiac muscle fiber cells in the heart that go through a developmental change. And they become what are called Purkinje fibers, named after the anatomist, or not neuroanatomist, the histologist, cardiologist, who first identified them. Purkinje fibers. These are fibers who can initiate an action potential. They can initiate action potentials, but they do it spontaneously and rhythmically. We're going to look at exactly how that, not exactly, but we're going to look in a little bit more detail at that in another slide. But they spontaneously depolarize and cause an action potential that starts in this place in the heart called the SA node. It stands for sinoatrial node. Sinoatrial node. It's up here in the right atrium. You don't need to worry about all that. This SA node then has these branches that extend down to the AV node. It goes down this AV bundle to the bundle branches, moderator band, all that stuff, out to these distal Purkinje fibers. Basically, these cells up in the SA node begin to depolarize. They begin to fire an action potential, and that spreads through the heart. So the heart begins to contract as a whole. We get a pumping of the blood through the heart. It all begins here in the SA node. So this happens pretty rapidly, about 1 to 4 milliseconds from the time that the SA node fires. We get a signal that has gone down through all of the tissue of the heart and caused that muscle to begin its contraction sequence. We're not going to go through the deep part of all of that, but I want to explain how the cells in the heart spontaneously go to action potential and cause the heart to contract. All right. So on the right, we see the cardiac cycle in sort of a scheme. And it starts here. We're having a cardiac contraction. It's being contracted, followed by relaxation. Maybe we'll start with relaxation happens. Then electrical stimulus at the SA node begins. So spontaneously begins. And it distributes itself throughout the conduction pathway and triggers the heart to contract. This distribution through the conduction system is what gives us the ECG. This is potential on this axis. This is time on this axis. And we get this spike. We get this spike in electrical potential that can be picked up by electrodes on our body. All right. And so when you're measuring the electrocardiogram, that's what it's picking up. It's just picking up the change in electrical potential that's being generated by action in this conduction system. And so for each heartbeat, there's one spike. All right? Yep, everybody with me? All right. And this is where we get the heart sounds. It maintains blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so let's actually look at this now over here. And rather than looking at the global potential as picked up by electrodes on the skin that gives us ECG, I'm looking at the transmembrane potential in a single one of these cells, in a single Purkinje fiber. This is just one of the cells in this SA node. And that membrane, that cell membrane, has an electrical potential across it. I didn't take the time to go through really detailing how that gets established and what that means, because that would take a whole lecture. But there's this electrical potential, and that potential, that voltage, there's a threshold voltage. When that membrane reaches that threshold, you get an action potential. So this change in electrical potential, and that's going to lead to all the downstream effects that affect all the other cells. And so we have this action potential, and then the cell resets itself. It comes back down to this pre-potential. But in a normal neuron or muscle cell, it would just stay down here until it got another signal from some nerve that told it to start again. But not in these pacemaker cells. They're a little bit leaky. And so they spontaneously depolarize. Normally, it would take the input from some other nerve or something like that to cause it to come up to threshold and get to this action potential to spring the trap. But here, it's leaky, and it does it spontaneously, so that with time, it'll get to this threshold and have another firing. So each one of these would correspond with a cascade of events that are all part of one heartbeat. Who have I lost?
So
No one?
each of those bumps.
They would be like a heartbeat. It's not a sound that we're looking at here. It's not even the ECG, because the ECG is the collection of all of the cells in the heart. All right? This is kind of hiding under there. One of these is hiding under there, right? But that is like measuring this for all of the cells in the heart. With me? Sweet. What did I write here? Pacemaker cells and the SA node spontaneously depolarize. Yeah, so basically what I just told you. All right. So that's all of the heart physiology I'm going to talk about. Now I'm going to add how the ANS. All right, I'm not really going to get a chance to go through all this here, this slide. But we'll pick up with this next time.